Hello everyone.
About 70% of the friends who watch my videos are not subscribed, and I would be very happy if you did.
I know many of you use these videos to fall asleep, so before you drift off, I'd love it if you could leave a comment letting me know where you're listening from around the world. Story 1. It started as a way to shake off a little stress, just one night to feel like myself again. After juggling parenting, work, and everything in between, I thought I deserved a brief escape. No strings, no pressure, just a one-time encounter with someone I met through a mutual friend. We talked, laughed, and shared a moment of vulnerability that somehow felt safe in the dark. I did not think much of it afterward and returned to my regular life the next morning. The following week, everything went back to normal. My mornings were filled with lunchboxes, reminders about homework, and juggling drop-offs before rushing to work. The upcoming school event had my full attention. My child had been practicing for it and was beyond excited to perform on stage. I was focused on being present, proud, and supportive, not on anything else from my personal life. On the day of the event, I arrived early to save a good seat near the front. The auditorium slowly filled with parents, grandparents, and teachers, all bustling with the usual energy of these school functions. The kids lined up backstage, and I could hear the teachers doing their best to keep them calm and focused. I glanced around the room, smiling at familiar faces and waving at other parents. That was when I saw them. Sitting 2 rows behind me, almost directly in my line of sight, was the person I had shared that one night with. My stomach dropped. For a second, I convinced myself I was mistaken, but they turned slightly, and the recognition was instant. They were definitely not a parent from the class, nor had they ever mentioned having kids. My heart started racing, and 100 questions flooded my mind. What were they doing here? Did they have some unknown connection to the school? Or worse, had they come here to see me? I tried not to panic, reminding myself that it could be a coincidence. Maybe they had a niece or nephew performing, but my gut told me otherwise. Throughout the performance, I struggled to stay focused. My child beamed on stage, singing and dancing with such joy that I did not want to let anything ruin the moment. I clapped, I smiled, I even laughed along with the crowd. But I felt the weight of that person's presence the entire time. They did not approach me during the show, but I caught them glancing in my direction more than once. After the event, the crowd spilled out into the hallways. Parents hugged their kids, took pictures, and chatted about the show. I tried to disappear into the mix, holding my child's hand and steering them toward the classroom. Just as I turned down the hallway, I heard a familiar voice call out my name. I froze. They had followed me. I turned slowly and saw them walking toward me, hands in their pockets and a smile that looked far too confident for the situation. They said it was nice to see me again, and that they had been thinking about me since that night. I nodded politely, keeping my tone calm and cool, trying to keep the conversation short. My child tugged on my hand, asking who that person was, and I told him it was someone I barely knew. They tried to keep talking, asking if I wanted to get coffee or catch up sometime soon. I felt uncomfortable and cornered, standing in a school hallway surrounded by other families. I told them firmly that this was not the place and that I had no interest in continuing anything. They looked taken aback, like they had expected a warmer reaction. I did not owe them anything, especially not in front of my child. I left the school feeling shaken and unsettled. That night I could not sleep. I kept going over every word, every glance, trying to understand why they showed up at that event. I had been clear that I was not looking for anything serious. The encounter had not included any mention of family or school. It had been one night, and I had assumed we both understood that. The next morning I called the school office and asked if the person was on any guest list or if they had checked in through the front desk. The staff confirmed there was no record of them signing in, and they were not recognized as a guardian or relative of any student. My worst fear was confirmed. They had no reason to be there. They had come solely because they knew I would be. That realization lit a fire in me. I decided to set boundaries more clearly and protect the space around my child. I sent a message short and firm explaining that their presence at the school event was inappropriate and unwelcome. I asked that they not contact me again. There was no confrontation, no drawn-out exchange, just one final line drawn where it should have been from the start. To my relief, they never replied. Weeks went by, and I saw no sign of them. I started to breathe easier, the tension slowly leaving my shoulders. Life returned to its regular pace, filled with school runs, work emails, and bedtime stories. My child had no memory of the strange encounter, which was a gift in itself. The experience taught me a valuable lesson about how careful I needed to be with who I let into my life, even briefly. It was not about shame or regret, but about awareness and responsibility. I had every right to seek companionship, but I also had to be vigilant, especially as a parent. My world was not just mine anymore. Every decision I made rippled through the life of someone who depended on me. But eventually I found peace again. I went to more school events, cheered from the crowd, and took pride in every little milestone my child achieved. I no longer glanced around nervously or hesitated before showing up. That sense of safety and control returned because I reclaimed it. I did not let one uncomfortable moment define my story. What began as an awkward and frightening experience turned into a reminder of my strength. I handled it with grace and assertiveness, not allowing fear to take root. More importantly, I protected my child and made sure they felt safe and supported at all times. I moved forward with a renewed sense of purpose, making room only for people who respected the boundaries I set. Not every mistake needs to haunt us. Some can be corrected, not erased but redirected. I let that moment be one of clarity, not fear. And in doing so, I became more confident in the kind of life I wanted to build for both of us. One rooted in safety, honesty, and calm choices that lead to real peace. Story 2. I signed up for a free trial at a co-working space because I needed a change of environment. Working from home had started to feel repetitive, and the distraction of chores made it hard to stay focused. The co-working space was bright, filled with natural light and the soft hum of others typing and talking quietly. The receptionist gave me a key card and told me I had been assigned a desk in the corner by the window. It was a quiet spot with a nice view of the street below. The first day went smoothly. I set up my laptop, plugged in my charger, and started working. The desk had a clean surface, and the chair was surprisingly comfortable. I noticed a small chip in the corner of the desk and a scratch along the edge, but nothing that stood out. I worked for hours without issue and packed up when the place started to empty around 6 p.m. The next morning I returned and was told I had the same desk. It struck me as odd, since I thought desk assignments rotated during the trial period. Still, I liked the corner spot and did not question it. I set up my things again and got to work. Around lunch, I dropped my pen, and it rolled under the desk. When I reached underneath to grab it, my hand brushed against something stuck to the bottom. Curious, I crouched down and looked closer. There were several pieces of tape stuck to the underside of the desk. Holding them in place were old photographs, curling at the corners, stuck flat against the wood. At first, I did not understand what I was seeing. The photos were small, a little faded, but the more I looked, the more familiar they became. They were of me. Some were candid, like shots taken from a distance while I walked across a campus. Others looked like they had been taken through windows, catching me in moments I never remembered being photographed. I stared at them, frozen, heart thudding. There was no way these had ended up here by coincidence. Someone had deliberately placed them under the desk. I peeled a few off to study them, and it was clear they were taken years ago. Some of the clothes I wore in the photos I no longer even owned. I stuffed the pictures into my bag and sat back in the chair, feeling numb. Who would do this and why? I looked around the room, scanning the other faces, suddenly hyper-aware of every person. Everyone looked normal, working or talking quietly. But someone had put those photos there, and that meant they knew I would be at that desk. I packed up early that day, needing to get out. On the walk home, I kept checking over my shoulder. I could not shake the feeling that someone was watching me. Once I got inside my apartment, I locked the door, closed the blinds, and pulled out the photos again. I laid them across my table and tried to make sense of the timeline. The photos spanned years, starting from what looked like my final year in high school up to just a few years ago. They were not grouped or labeled, just taped randomly under the desk. Some had a blur in the corner, like someone had tried to crop themselves out or move quickly. They were taken from different angles, with different cameras, but always with the same subject. Me. Reese. That night I barely slept. I kept thinking about who had access to that co-working space and how long those photos might have been there. I considered not going back, but part of me needed answers. The next morning I returned, feeling tense. The receptionist smiled and waved like nothing was wrong, and again, I was told to sit at the same desk. This time I brought gloves and a flashlight. As soon as I got to the desk, I ducked under and checked more carefully. There were no new photos, but I found a torn piece of paper stuck behind one of the beams. Written in block letters, it said, "I remember you." My throat went dry, and I pocketed the paper without reacting. I decided I needed to talk to someone. I asked the receptionist if I could switch desks. She looked at the computer, then said, "It looks like you were permanently assigned to that one during your trial." I asked if that was normal, and she paused before replying, "It varies, but yours came with a note. Just a request to place you in that spot for the full week." I asked to see the note, but she said it had been discarded. I left the co-working space quickly after that. Back home, I tried to look up the company and their policies, but there was nothing unusual. The reviews were mostly positive. It was as if no one else had experienced anything strange. I started searching my memory for times when I felt watched or followed in the past. I remembered once during my college years, thinking someone was standing outside my window late at night. I had chalked it up to a shadow. Another time I thought I saw someone at the far end of a train platform, staring directly at me. But they disappeared before I could react. Now those moments seemed like pieces of a larger picture. Someone had been following me for a long time, collecting these glimpses into my life. They had been patient, methodical, waiting until I sat at the right desk to reveal themselves. I was not ready to know who it was, but I knew I could not stay silent. I printed copies of the photos and the note and brought them to the front desk of the co-working space the next day. I asked to speak with the manager. He met me in a side room, looking curious but calm. I laid out the photos and explained how I found them. His face changed quickly, turning pale and serious. He promised to investigate, and I could tell he meant it. They had security cameras, and he said he would check the footage. I left with the promise that he would contact me soon. That evening I got a call. They had found something. The camera footage showed a former member entering late at night, using an old access code that should have been deactivated. He went straight to my desk and spent a long time underneath it. The man had been banned months ago for inappropriate behavior, but somehow he kept slipping inside. The footage showed him taping the photos and slipping out quietly. The co-working space reported it to the authorities. They changed the locks, updated their security protocols, and offered me a new membership with complete access to a private office. I declined. I appreciated the effort, but I needed time before I could work in public spaces again. My trust had been shaken. Eventually, I heard they caught the man. He had a long history of similar behavior and had been investigated before. Knowing he was no longer free helped restore a sense of peace. I deleted the photos, erased his notes, and let the fear go, little by little. I work from home again now. My apartment is safe, the doors secure, and I keep watch without becoming paranoid. The experience reminded me that vigilance matters, and sometimes your instincts know what your eyes have not yet seen. I kept the original note, not as a warning, but as a symbol of what I overcame. I was watched, but I refused to stay in the dark. Story 3. It had been a while since I spent a night out with friends doing something different. We were always trying new things, and this time someone suggested an escape room. I had never done one before, but the idea of solving puzzles as a team seemed fun. We booked a slot at a highly rated place downtown that had a horror theme. Everyone was excited, and the energy on the waiter was light and joking. When we arrived, the lobby was dimly lit and decorated to match the theme of the room. A person dressed in a dramatic costume greeted us with a deep voice, clearly playing a character. They welcomed us and explained the rules with an eerie tone, staying completely in character. It added to the tension in the room, but we were all smiling, ready for a good time. The actor had an unnerving presence, but it was impressive. They paced slowly in front of us as they described the storyline of the escape room. We were a group of investigators trapped in a haunted asylum, racing to uncover the secrets before time ran out. It sounded theatrical, creepy, and creative. Then, without warning, they turned to me specifically and said, "Welcome, Ghost Legs." Ready to run? I froze for a second, unsure if I heard correctly. That nickname had not been used in years, not since college. It was a silly name from a dorm party, tied to a joke about how I ran during a fire drill. Only a few people from back then even knew about it. My friends beside me looked confused, and I forced a laugh to mask my discomfort. I tried to brush it off and focus on the game. We were ushered into a dark hallway where the first puzzle began. The experience was immersive and tense, but I kept thinking about the nickname. I had not told anyone in this group about it, and I doubted anyone had mentioned it online. It was a strange detail to slip in during a scripted introduction. As we progressed through the escape room, I kept waiting for the actor to mention it again, but they didn't. They stuck to the storyline, popping in occasionally to offer cryptic hints or hurry us along. My unease faded slightly, and I managed to get caught up in solving the puzzles. Still, the comment lingered in the back of my mind. We reached the halfway point, and the actor returned to reset the tone. They delivered a dramatic warning about the dangers ahead, looking each of us in the eye. When their gaze settled on me, they smirked slightly, then called me by the nickname again. It was subtle but intentional, like an inside joke no one else was in on. My stomach tightened, and I felt the energy shift. After the room was over and we escaped with just 2 minutes to spare, we took a group photo and laughed about how tense it got near the end. I tried to stay relaxed, not wanting to bring up what had happened just yet. My friends did not mention the nickname again, so I figured maybe they had forgotten it or thought it was just a coincidence. I smiled for the photo, trying not to show that I was still unnerved. We left the escape room and walked down the block to get some late dinner. Over food, I casually asked if anyone else caught the actor calling me something strange. One of my friends nodded and said, "Yeah, ghost legs?" What was that about? I shrugged and said it was probably just part of the act, though the explanation felt hollow even as I said it. That night, when I got home, I lay in bed thinking about it more. I had not used that name in over a decade, and it had never come up outside a small group. My social media profiles were locked down, and even then the nickname was never posted. It felt too personal to be a coincidence. I decided to look up the escape room's website to see if there were any clues. I scanned the staff page, hoping to recognize a face or name that might explain the connection. None of them looked familiar. I even tried searching old college photos to see if anyone might have ended up working there. Nothing stood out. There were no connections I could trace, and the mystery deepened. The next day, I called the escape room under the pretense of asking about a photo from the event. While on the line, I asked casually if the actors had access to any guest information before the game started. The person on the phone said no, that actors only get a team name and group size. They confirmed that the character intros were scripted and not customized. That ruled out a harmless mistake. I asked if there were cameras in the lobby, and they confirmed there were, but they were not recorded or monitored in detail, just there for safety. I thanked them and hung up, more puzzled than ever. If the actor had no access to my identity and the scripts were not tailored, how did they know the nickname? I started wondering if someone from my past could have been the actor. Maybe someone I had not recognized under makeup or costume. I pulled up the group photo and studied the host in the background. The lighting made it hard to see clearly, but nothing about them looked familiar. It still left me with no explanation. Over the following week, I tried not to obsess, but the feeling of being seen and known by someone anonymous nagged at me. I considered calling some old classmates to ask if anyone might have moved to the city or worked in the entertainment space. I did not want to seem paranoid, so I kept the idea to myself. Eventually, I let the question settle without an answer. Some mysteries do not resolve neatly, and this seemed to be one of them. But something about the way the actor had looked at me made me believe they knew. It was not just coincidence, it was intention. A few weeks later, one of my friends suggested we try another escape room. I hesitated but agreed, curious to see if anything strange would happen again. This time it was at a different place with a completely different theme and team. We had a great time, and nothing unusual occurred. After that, I felt a little better. Maybe it had been a one-time thing. Maybe someone just got lucky with a weird guess. Still, I made it a point to check over my online presence, tighten my privacy settings and remove anything too personal from public view. It felt like a good time to be cautious. Months passed, and the nickname incident faded into a strange memory. I never heard it again, and none of my friends brought it up after that night. The experience left a mark, though, a quiet reminder that the past has a way of finding you, even in places you least expect it. I learned to take things as they come and not let odd experiences consume me. There are always going to be unexplained moments in life, and not all of them are meant to be solved. What mattered most was that I was safe, surrounded by people I trusted, and still capable of enjoying new experiences. That night at the escape room taught me something deeper than just staying calm during a puzzle. It reminded me that people carry pieces of your story, sometimes quietly, and those pieces might surface when you least expect them. It is what you do with that surprise that defines the moment. Now when I think about it, I smile. Not because I have answers, but because I faced the unexpected and came out fine. Life is full of strange echoes from the past, and sometimes all you can do is listen, acknowledge, and move forward. And that is exactly what I did. Story 4. I had not been away from my apartment in months, so when a friend invited me out of town for the weekend, I said yes without much thought. I packed lightly, made sure to lock everything, and even double-checked the windows before I left. The trip was nice, peaceful, and just what I needed. But as I stepped back into my apartment on Sunday evening, something felt off. It was not anything visible, just a shift in the air that made the hairs on my neck rise. The lights were off, and everything seemed untouched, exactly how I had left it. I walked through the small living room and set down my bag. The quiet was familiar, but too still, like the space had held its breath the whole time I was gone. I went to the kitchen, opened the fridge, and found the same leftover takeout I had expected. Nothing was missing, but something was wrong, and I could not quite name it. I shrugged it off at first, blaming the feeling on post-trip fatigue. But I had just driven several hours and probably needed rest. After a quick shower, I walked into the bathroom one last time to brush my teeth before bed. That was when I noticed it. The toilet seat was warm. Not lukewarm like it had been exposed to sunlight or warm air. It felt like someone had just been sitting there. My body stiffened, and I stood in the doorway, staring at the closed lid. But I had been gone all weekend. There was no one else with a key. I lived alone. I lifted the lid slowly, half expecting to find something underneath. But the bowl was clean, and the water still. I touched the seat again to be sure. Still warm. It was not my imagination. I backed away and walked into the hallway, trying to think of an explanation that would make sense. Maybe there was a heating issue, I told myself. The bathroom did get warm sometimes, especially with the door closed. But I had never felt the toilet seat like that before. I walked into the living room and sat down on the couch, still in my towel, replaying everything I had done before leaving the apartment. I knew I had locked the door. I checked it again just to be sure. Still locked, deadbolt and all. No signs of forced entry. I even checked the windows, though they were all sealed tight. I did not have a balcony, and I was on the 3rd floor. No way in or out unless someone had a key. The thought made me shiver. Had someone been in my apartment while I was gone? Had they left just before I returned? The idea was disturbing enough, but what unsettled me more was the lack of any other evidence. No mess, no missing items, nothing touched. Just a warm toilet seat. I decided not to call anyone just yet. I needed to be sure I was not overreacting. Maybe it really was nothing. I turned on all the lights and did a full sweep of the place, checking closets under the bed, even behind the shower curtain. Everything was empty. Still, I locked my bedroom door that night. Sleep came slowly, and when it did, it was restless. I kept waking up at random hours, listening for sounds. Each time, the silence pressed in on me. When morning came, I felt like I had not slept at all. I made coffee and sat at the kitchen table, staring at my phone, unsure what to do. I thought about getting a security camera, just for peace of mind. I searched online and ordered a small one that could be installed easily, facing the front door. It would arrive the next day. Until then, I stayed close to home, keeping the lights on, jumping at small noises. I hated how uneasy I felt in my own space. That evening, I decided to check the building's front entrance camera. I had never needed it before, but the manager once mentioned it was available for tenants if needed. I walked down to the front office and asked if I could see the weekend footage. The clerk on duty seemed hesitant but agreed. We scrolled through hours of video. Most of it was uneventful. Residents coming and going, packages delivered, nothing strange. No, but around 2 a.m. on Saturday, something caught my eye. A figure approached the front entrance, hooded and wearing gloves. They entered with a key. My stomach dropped. There was no way someone should have had a key to the building, unless they were a resident. The camera showed them heading up the stairs, not the elevator, and then disappearing out of frame. The footage ended without showing them leave. I asked the clerk to save a copy. Back in my apartment, the feeling of violation grew heavier. Someone had entered the building with a key and had possibly come into my place. I paced the floor, thinking of every possibility. A former tenant? A former tenant? A maintenance worker with an old key. Someone had been there, and I could not ignore it anymore. The camera I ordered arrived the next morning. I installed it immediately, pointing it straight at the door. I also placed small pieces of tape at the edges of drawers and doors, subtle things I would notice if moved. I took photos of how everything looked, just in case. That night, I slept again with the bedroom door locked. For the next few days, nothing happened. I checked the footage each evening and saw only myself coming and going. The apartment was silent, the tape untouched. I started to relax a little, thinking maybe it had been a one-time thing. Maybe someone had made a mistake and gone into the wrong unit. But then, on Thursday morning, I woke up to something strange. One of the cabinet doors in the kitchen was slightly ajar. Just barely. The tape was loose. I had not opened that cabinet since placing the tape. I checked the camera, heart racing. The footage showed nothing until around 3 a.m. The screen went dark for 6 minutes. It turned back on with a slight static buzz, then resumed like nothing had happened. I stared at it, chills running down my spine. Someone had tampered with it. I walked through the apartment slowly, checking each spot I had marked. Only the kitchen cabinet had been touched. Nothing stolen, nothing disturbed except that. I packed a bag and left that morning to stay with a friend. I could not stay another night there. I called the police and filed a report, showing them the footage and explaining everything. They took notes, asked questions, and told me they would investigate. I handed over the copy of the building camera footage too. A few days passed. I stayed away and tried not to think about what might have happened if I had stayed longer that night. Then I got a call. The officer handling the case had some answers. The person seen entering the building was a former janitor who had not returned all his keys. He had been caught entering another unit that week. He was arrested and questioned. Apparently, he had been sneaking into empty units during weekends, taking nothing, just staying briefly and leaving no trace. A strange compulsion, they said. He confessed to being in mine, but only for a few minutes. Sat on the toilet, used the bathroom, and left. Nothing more. It was disturbing, but also relieving. At least there was a face and a reason, however strange. He had no violent record, no history of theft. Just a deeply unsettling behavior that finally caught up to him. The police returned my footage and confirmed his keys had been collected. I moved out not long after, found a new place, changed all the locks, and kept the camera running. The memory stayed with me for a while, especially every time I used the bathroom. But over time, the fear faded. I took comfort in knowing I had trusted my instincts and acted on them. But now, I check everything before leaving for more than a day. I do not ignore those strange feelings anymore. Sometimes it is not your mind playing tricks. Sometimes it is the only warning you will get. And sometimes something as simple as a warm toilet seat tells a much bigger story. Story 5. I had been searching for affordable furniture after moving into a new apartment. The budget was tight, so I turned to second-hand shops in the area. One afternoon, I came across a charming wooden dresser at a local thrift store. It had a few scuffs and scratches, but the structure was solid, and the drawers slid in and out smoothly. The price was reasonable, and I could picture it fitting perfectly in my bedroom. The store employee helped load it into my car, and I drove it home with a feeling of satisfaction. That night, I wiped the surface clean and started organizing my clothes into the drawers. As I was placing shirts into the second drawer from the top, my hand brushed against something stuck to the underside. I paused, then reached in again to feel it properly. I pulled out a small, black object no larger than a matchbox. It was taped under the drawer with clear packing tape. At first, I thought it might be part of the drawer's construction or an old key someone forgot. Upon closer inspection, I realized it was a tiny microphone. My stomach dropped as I stared at it, trying to understand why it was there. I turned it over and noticed a tiny switch and what looked like a dead battery. It did not look like something a store would install for security or inventory. I felt a sudden chill, wondering who had put it there and for what reason. Carefully, I set it on the table and went back to inspect the rest of the dresser. I removed each drawer one by one and turned them over, checking for anything else hidden. Nothing. The rest of the dresser seemed clean and empty. I stood in the middle of my room, holding that small device, unsure of what to do next. Part of me wanted to throw it away, pretend I had never found it. But my curiosity got the better of me. I took a few photos of it using my phone, then opened my laptop to search for similar devices. It matched several small surveillance microphones sold online, often advertised for discreet monitoring. Some were meant for offices or vehicles. Others had more troubling descriptions. The idea that someone had been listening through it made my skin crawl. I started to worry that I had brought something dangerous into my home. What if the person who installed it had been tracking the dresser? What if they were still out there listening or watching? I placed the microphone in a plastic bag and zipped it shut, not knowing what else to do. I barely slept that night. The next morning, I called the thrift store and asked if they kept records of where their furniture came from. The person on the phone said most of their items were donations, and that detailed information usually was not available. I mentioned finding something unusual in a dresser I bought. The employee asked what it was, and I told them vaguely it was a small electronic device. There was a pause before they said I could bring it in for them to check. I thanked them but decided against it. Something told me I should keep it, at least for a while, until I figured out more. I started thinking about who would want to bug a dresser and why. The most logical answer was that it had not been meant for me. I had just become part of someone else's story. Later that week, I visited a local electronics store and showed the microphone to a technician. I asked if they could tell if it had been active recently or if it had stored data. They examined it under a magnifying lens and said it looked like a passive microphone, likely needing an external receiver to transmit audio. There was no internal storage. That meant someone had to be nearby to hear anything it picked up. That thought unsettled me even more. I started looking around my apartment each night, checking windows and door locks twice before bed. I felt like someone had been in my space before me, and now I was trying to reclaim it. I wanted to understand how something so small could cause such a deep sense of intrusion. I stopped inviting anyone over for a while, needing to feel safe again. Eventually, I took the microphone to the police station. I explained how I found it and where the dresser came from. The officer listened carefully, then asked if I had noticed anyone suspicious near my home. I said no. They logged a report and took the device, telling me it would be submitted for evidence just in case. I left the station with a mixed sense of relief and lingering unease. It helped to hand it over to someone with authority, someone who could trace its origin. But I also knew it might lead nowhere. The thrift store had no records, and the device had no unique identifiers. Still, I had done what I could. Over time, the fear faded. I got used to the dresser being just another piece of furniture. I started sleeping better, leaving the curtains open again and inviting friends to visit. Life settled back into a rhythm. I found a sense of control again, even if questions still lingered. Eventually, I bought a small camera for my own peace of mind and installed it discreetly by my door. It was not about paranoia. It was about balance, about feeling empowered in my own space. The experience taught me to pay attention and trust my instincts when something feels off. Months later, I received a call from the police. They had investigated the microphone and determined that it had likely belonged to someone conducting unauthorized surveillance during a domestic dispute. The furniture had been part of a storage unit donated anonymously. The person involved was no longer in the area. Hearing that brought closure. I had nothing to do with that situation, just happened to be the next person in line. The microphone was not meant for me. I had not been watched, not targeted, only caught in the tail end of someone else's story. That knowledge lifted a weight from my shoulders. Now, whenever I buy anything secondhand, I inspect it more carefully. But I am not afraid. I learned that sometimes the past clings to objects in ways we do not expect. What matters is how we respond when the unexpected finds its way to us. I chose to face it, understand it, and let it go. Story 6. I had been traveling a lot for work lately, bouncing from one city to another with barely enough time to rest between meetings. This trip was no different. I arrived at the hotel late in the evening, tired from the flight and the long day of presentations. The woman at the front desk greeted me kindly, handed over my room key, and gave the usual rundown of amenities. I thanked her, took the elevator to the 3rd floor, and dragged my luggage down the quiet hallway. When I entered the room, the first thing I noticed was how perfect the temperature felt. It was exactly how I liked it, cool but not cold, with just enough chill in the air to make the bed feel extra inviting. I stopped in my tracks and stared at the thermostat. 72 degrees. It was such a specific number, and it matched my home settings exactly. I rarely told anyone about that preference. It was strange, but I brushed it off as a coincidence. I freshened up, unpacked just enough to get by for the night, and sat on the edge of the bed trying to unwind. The room was neat, modern, and surprisingly quiet for a downtown hotel. As I sat there, the thermostat lingered in my mind. I usually had to adjust the temperature in hotel rooms, often finding them too hot or freezing. This one felt like it had been prepared for me. That thought made me pause again. I decided to test it. I walked over and adjusted the thermostat down a few degrees just to see if it responded. The screen flickered, accepted the input, and the air conditioner kicked in with a soft hum. Everything seemed normal. But I still had the odd sense that the room had been set up based on more than just general guest comfort. It felt personal. The next morning, I had to leave early for a client meeting. As I rushed to get ready, I noticed that the thermostat had quietly returned to 72 degrees. I was sure I had changed it the night before, and I doubted housekeeping would reset it. Still, I left for the meeting without making a fuss, deciding I would mention it later if it kept happening. When I returned that afternoon, I found the bed made, the trash emptied, and everything tidied. The room looked untouched apart from the usual cleaning. I walked over to the thermostat again. 72. I stared at it for a moment, then checked the settings to see if there was some automatic feature I had missed. There was nothing that would explain the reset. I started feeling unsettled. That night, I decided to call the front desk and ask about the room's settings. I casually mentioned the thermostat and asked if it was pre-programmed. The woman on the line hesitated for a second before saying rooms were generally set to 75 unless guests requested otherwise. I asked if they had records of temperature preferences for returning guests. She said no, not officially. Her answer made me more curious. I ended the call and sat on the bed, wondering what was going on. I had stayed at this hotel once before, but it had been more than a year ago, and I had not used any rewards or loyalty programs. There was no reason they should have remembered anything about me, let alone the exact temperature I liked. I began to feel like someone was paying more attention than they should. The next morning, I decided to test things further. Before leaving for breakfast, I turned the thermostat to 68. I took a photo for reference, left the room, and spent a few hours out. When I returned, the thermostat had once again been set to 72. It was not just a setting anymore, it was deliberate. Someone had changed it back. I went back to the front desk and asked if housekeeping had been in my room. The man there checked the computer and said no one had entered since the morning cleaning. I showed him the photo of the thermostat setting and explained what kept happening. He looked confused and offered to have maintenance take a look, which I agreed to. A technician came up about an hour later and inspected the unit. The technician said everything was functioning normally. No timer, no auto reset, no connected smart system that would override my settings. I thanked him and waited for him to leave before locking the door and setting the thermostat once again. this time to 70. I then placed a sticky note over the thermostat with a handwritten message that read, "Do not change this." I left it there and headed out for dinner. When I came back that evening, the sticky note was gone. The thermostat said 72. I looked through the trash, but the note was not there. I checked under the bed, behind the furniture, everywhere. Nothing. It was as if it had never existed. I started to feel like I was being watched. Not just monitored, but studied. That night I barely slept. Every creak and sound made me sit up in bed. I kept glancing at the thermostat, half expecting it to change in front of my eyes. By morning I was exhausted and more determined than ever to get answers. I took another photo, grabbed my things, and went to the front desk to request a room change. They agreed and gave me a new key card for a room on a different floor. The new room was nearly identical to the last, but when I stepped in, I immediately looked at the thermostat. It was set to 75. For the first time since I arrived, I felt relieved. I adjusted it myself, waited a while, and then left for another client meeting. When I came back that night, it was still at 70. No one had touched it. The sense of paranoia that had been building started to fade. I stayed in that room for the rest of the trip, and nothing else unusual happened. The temperature stayed exactly where I left it. No signs of intrusion, no vanishing notes, no unexplained changes. I finished my meetings, packed my things, and checked out without looking back. But even as I left, I could not shake the feeling that someone in that first room had known far too much about me. Back at home, I thought about what had happened and decided to do some research. I looked into the hotel, its management, and any news of strange behavior or smart room technology. Nothing turned up. I even emailed the company that supplied their thermostat units, asking about remote settings or test programs. They responded that their systems were not connected to any guest profiles. Eventually, I let it go. I told myself maybe it had been a glitch or an overactive imagination. Maybe someone on staff had recognized me from a previous visit and tried to go the extra mile. I wanted to believe that. But part of me still wonders if it was something more. Someone knew that small detail about me, something I had never shared. Even now, whenever I check into a hotel, I glance at the thermostat the moment I enter. Most of the time it is just a number. But once in a while, when it reads 72, I remember that trip. I remember how it felt to be known by someone I could not see. And each time I remind myself to be more careful about what parts of myself I assume are private. Because sometimes they are not as hidden as we think. Story 7. It started as a normal morning. I had a bit of free time and decided to stop by the small coffee shop a few blocks from my apartment. The place was quiet, filled with the usual soft hum of conversation and the occasional hiss of the espresso machine. I ordered my drink and found a spot near the window, just looking forward to a few minutes of quiet before my day truly began. It was peaceful, and I let my mind drift. As I sat there sipping my coffee, I noticed a phone on the edge of the table next to mine. Someone had left it behind. The case was a dull gray color, a little worn around the edges, with a clear slot on the back where a photo was tucked. I glanced at it without thinking, but something made me look again. The photo was of my child smiling, wearing the same red hoodie they used to wear years ago. My breath caught. It was not a recent photo, but it was one I remembered taking in our backyard during autumn. The leaves were scattered around them, and they were crouched beside a pile, grinning. I blinked hard and leaned in to look again, thinking my eyes were playing tricks on me. But there was no mistake. That was my child, and I had never given that photo to anyone outside my family. I looked around the coffee shop, suddenly feeling exposed. Who had been sitting there? Whose phone was this? I hesitated before touching it, but I could not just sit there knowing something so personal had ended up with a stranger. I picked it up, heart pounding, and walked over to the barista to ask if anyone had lost a phone. She looked up and smiled politely, saying someone had stepped outside but might be back. I asked her if she had seen who had been sitting at the table, but she only shrugged and pointed toward the window. I stepped outside and scanned the sidewalk. A few people were walking past, but no one seemed like they were searching for anything. Back inside, I stood near the door, holding the phone and waiting. The photo stared up at me through the clear plastic, each second making my skin crawl a little more. My thoughts raced. Had someone been watching us? Following us without my knowledge? How had they even gotten that photo? After 10 minutes, a man walked in and looked around. When he saw me holding the phone, he smiled and stepped forward, saying it was his. I froze for a moment, then handed it to him carefully, pretending not to have noticed the photo. He thanked me, took the phone, and quickly left. I watched him go, uneasy but unsure of what to do. I followed him outside and watched as he walked down the block and turned the corner. My hands were shaking. I returned to my seat and sat down slowly, trying to make sense of it all. I called my child's other parent to ask if they had ever given that photo to anyone. They hadn't. No one outside our immediate family should have had it. That night I barely slept. I checked all our old photo albums and digital backups. The photo was still there, buried in a folder from several years ago. It had never been shared online. It had not been printed or posted anywhere public. I felt the walls closing in with questions that had no answers. The next day, I returned to the coffee shop. I asked the staff if they recognized the man, but they had little to offer. He was just another customer, someone who passed through like hundreds of others. No one knew his name. I walked the area near the shop for an hour, hoping to spot him again, but he was gone. Days passed and nothing happened. No strange calls. No sightings. No more unexplained photos. But the unease never left me. I began walking my child to and from school, watching every face, every car. I installed new cameras around the house and changed our routines. A week later, I got a call from the coffee shop. The man had come back and left something for me. It was an envelope with no name, just a small note and a flash drive. I opened it with trembling hands. The note said, "I found this in a donated phone. Thought you should have it. No signature. No explanation." I plugged the flash drive into my laptop and opened the files. Inside were dozens of photos, all seemingly random, most of them of families and children at parks, beaches, public spaces. But then among them were 4 pictures of my child, all taken at a distance. Some I recognized from events we had attended years ago. I had never seen anyone suspicious at those times. I never suspected we were being watched. I brought the photos to the police and filed a report. They took it seriously, especially since the photos had clearly been collected without consent. They opened an investigation and kept the drive for evidence. I felt relieved that it was no longer just my burden to carry. Weeks passed, and the police eventually called back. They had traced the phone to a second-hand electronics store. It had been sold there, along with a few other items. The previous owner was located and questioned. They claimed they had bought the phone secondhand too, and had no idea about the photos in it. It was frustrating, but the trail seemed to end there. Still, I had taken every possible step to make sure we were protected. Our home security was upgraded, and I never let my guard down when out with my child. We moved on with our lives, but the experience left a mark. Months later, I was at a school event, watching my child run across the field full of joy. I looked around at the crowd and realized how easily strangers can fade into the background. How simple it is for someone to become invisible in plain sight. But I also felt stronger, more aware, and more determined to protect what matters most. That photo was a wake-up call. A reminder that we can never be too careful, but also that we are not powerless. I had taken control back, one step at a time. Whatever the reason that photo ended up in that phone case, it no longer held power over me. The stranger who once seemed like a threat had disappeared. Maybe their intent had not been malicious. Maybe they had found the phone and kept the photo by accident. I would never know the full truth. But I knew I had done everything I could to protect my child. Now, every time I look at that same photo in our album, I feel something different. Not fear, but resolve. I remember how I faced uncertainty, followed the trail, and turned a moment of dread into action. That picture is still a reminder, but now it reminds me of the strength I did not know I had. Story 8. The seminar went better than I expected. I had been nervous leading up to it, worried I might stumble over my words or forget an important point. But the audience was receptive, engaged, and asked thoughtful questions. It felt good to share knowledge and watch people genuinely interested in what I had to say. That sense of fulfillment carried me through the final handshakes and polite smiles as the room cleared out. After the last person left, I stayed behind to gather my notes and shut off the projector. I paced the front of the room a few times, replaying sections of the talk in my mind, wondering if I could have said something differently. Eventually, I began heading toward the exit. The hallway was quiet now, a faint echo from someone shutting a distant door. Then I saw it, sitting there alone on the floor near the wall. It was a napkin, folded once, partially tucked under the leg of a bench. The only reason I noticed it was because of the way the handwriting bled slightly through the thin paper. I bent down to pick it up, assuming it was just someone's discarded note or trash. But when I unfolded it and read the words, my chest tightened. It was my home address, written in neat, firm handwriting. No name, no explanation, just the exact street number, city, and zip code. There was something deeply unsettling about it, the simplicity of it all. No threat, no insult, nothing but information that no one in that building should have known. I froze, staring at it, trying to understand. Had I ever mentioned it during my talk? I was sure I had not. I never share personal information in public settings, especially not something like my home address. That kind of detail is off limits by default. Yet here it was, scribbled on a napkin left carelessly or deliberately in my path. I folded it back up and tucked it into my bag without thinking. My heart was thumping now, a subtle but growing tension in my limbs. I tried to convince myself it could be a coincidence, a mistake, maybe even a prank. But the rational part of me knew better. That was not a detail someone writes by accident. I left the building quickly, eyes scanning the hallway, the lobby, and then the sidewalk. The street was mostly empty, just a few students and staff members heading in different directions. I looked behind me more than once as I walked to my car, Every movement felt a little sharper, a little more significant. The drive home was quiet. I kept glancing in the rearview mirror. I told myself it was just a piece of paper, just a weird moment, nothing more. But fear has a way of creeping into the smallest cracks. I locked my doors when I got home, double-checked all the windows, and made sure every entry point was secure. Later that evening, I sat at the kitchen table with the napkin laid out in front of me. I stared at it, the familiar curves of my own street name looking strange and foreign when written in someone else's hand. I could not shake the feeling that someone wanted me to know they knew. That kind of knowledge does not end up in the wrong hands by accident. I reported it the next day, but there was not much to investigate. No security cameras in the hallway where I found it, or no fingerprints on the napkin that could be lifted clearly. Just a scribbled address and a sense of unease that lingered longer than anything else. I was told to be cautious, to stay aware of my surroundings. So I did. I installed cameras around my property. I changed my usual routines, leaving at different times, coming home through different routes. I even stopped sharing photos or details online, cutting down the digital footprint I had once carelessly expanded. The napkin had changed something fundamental in me. A week passed without incident, and then another. I still felt the weight of that discovery, but it began to dull around the edges. I kept up my new habits and maintained vigilance, but the immediate fear faded into a distant tension, like a quiet whisper always in the background. It never fully left. One night I came home to find a small package on my doorstep. It had no return address. My stomach dropped. I stared at it for a while before deciding to bring it inside carefully. It was small, light, and taped shut in a tidy way. I opened it slowly, holding my breath. Inside was a book, an old copy of one I had referenced during my seminar. But there was no note, no signature, nothing else in the package. Just the book, its pages worn at the edges. I flipped through it, searching for some kind of message. On the inside cover, a single word was underlined in pencil: listen. That night I barely slept. I kept the lights on and watched the camera feeds obsessively. I still had no idea who had written my address or left that book. But now it felt like more than just a warning. It was a game, a signal, something I did not understand. I made another report, but again there was little to go on. Despite everything, nothing else happened. No further notes, no visits, no strange packages. Slowly, the tension began to unravel. I kept the book, though I never touched it again. It sat on a shelf like a reminder of how exposed I once felt. Over time, I found myself less anxious and more analytical. I stopped waiting for something to happen. Instead, I built a life with stronger boundaries. I kept speaking, kept teaching, but I guarded my privacy like a gatekeeper. The napkin had taught me that line between public and private was thinner than I believed. Years later, I sometimes think about that napkin. It still sits folded in a drawer in the back of my desk. I never threw it away. I never solved the mystery. But I learned something valuable from it. I learned that fear can either freeze you or sharpen you. I chose the latter. I did not let one act of intrusion define me. I adapted, I stayed cautious, and I moved forward. Whoever left that napkin wanted to get in my head. But they only managed to help me build stronger walls. And behind those walls, I live a life not ruled by fear, but by awareness. Story 9. Well, it was a cloudy Wednesday afternoon when I booked a rideshare after a long shift at work. The restaurant had been unusually busy, and all I wanted was to get home quickly and quietly. I ordered the ride like I always did, through the same app I had used dozens of times before. Nothing about it felt off at first. The car pulled up outside the back entrance just as I walked out, which was normal. I got in and greeted the driver with a tired smile, barely glancing at his face. He returned the greeting, then started driving without asking me for my destination. That caught me off guard. I opened my mouth to give the address, but before I could say anything, he mentioned it. Not only the street and building number, but also the apartment unit. My heart skipped a beat. He said it like he had done it before, casually, like it was just part of the job. I asked him how he knew where I lived, trying to keep my voice calm. He chuckled and said something about the app providing frequent locations. I had never listed my home as a favorite place, nor had I shared it manually with any driver. My stomach turned as I started to feel that something was very wrong. Then, as we drove through a slow intersection, he asked me how work had gone. That part was fine until he added the name of my workplace and asked if I was still working the same closing shift. My hands tensed on my lap. I had never mentioned where I worked during any rideshare before. I tried to laugh it off, asking him how he knew so much about me. He said he had picked me up before, more than once, and remembered my face. I asked him when, and he listed a few dates, all of which matched times I had taken rides, but they had been with different drivers. I checked my app while pretending to respond. None of the past rides had his name or face listed. My skin crawled. This man should not have had that information. I tried to remain calm. We were still a few minutes from my home, and I was trapped in the back seat. There were no signs of aggression, but the situation felt more threatening with every passing moment. I kept my phone in my hand and opened the emergency contact screen. If anything happened, I needed to be ready to act fast. I felt a cold sweat on my neck. I glanced outside, watching the landmarks go by to measure how close we were. I had to decide whether to get out early or ride it out. It was still daylight, and there were people on the sidewalks. I told him I needed to stop at a corner store and asked him to pull over at the next gas station. He hesitated slightly, but agreed. As soon as the car slowed near the gas station, I unbuckled my seatbelt and told him I had changed my mind and would walk from there. He looked surprised but did not argue. I got out quickly and walked straight into the store. I did not look back. Inside, I stood between aisles and waited until I saw the car drive away. I stayed in the store for a while, pretending to browse while I tried to calm down. Then I ordered another rideshare, making sure it was from a different platform this time. The new driver arrived in 10 minutes. I confirmed the car and driver through the window before stepping out. I kept the conversation brief and did not reveal anything personal. When I got home, I locked the door behind me and went straight to my computer. I reported the incident through the app, providing every detail I could remember. I also contacted customer service by phone, wanting to be sure someone actually reviewed my case. They apologized and promised to look into it. I pressed them to tell me how a driver who was not listed had my data. They told me the driver should not have had that information and suggested my account may have been accessed inappropriately. That alarmed me further. I immediately changed my login credentials and activated two-factor authentication. Then I checked the list of devices linked to my account. One was unfamiliar, showing recent access from a nearby town, but I removed it and logged out of all devices. For extra safety, I reviewed all my app permissions and location settings on my phone. I realized the app had background access to location data and had never been updated to limit tracking. That was my mistake. I disabled location history and made sure my personal details were removed from all rideshare profiles. I also contacted my workplace and informed them about what had happened. I asked if anyone had inquired about my shifts or schedule recently. My manager said no, but promised to keep an eye out. I started walking part of the way to work for the next few days and avoided ride shares unless absolutely necessary. If I had to take one, I made sure it was during daylight and that I shared my ride with a trusted contact through the app. I became much more cautious with every decision. Weeks passed without further incidents, though the discomfort stayed with me for a while. I never saw that driver again and never heard back with a full explanation from the app. Still, I knew I had done what I could to protect myself. I learned how important it is to treat apps and personal data with care. It was not enough to assume they were safe by default. Eventually, I got back into a routine, one that included new safety habits. I added a portable lock to my apartment door and always double-checked the license plate before entering any rideshare. I talked to my friends and warned them about what happened. Some had similar stories, though not as extreme. We started riding together more often and checking in after every trip. Despite how unsettling it had been, the experience made me stronger. It forced me to think about safety in a different way, not from a place of fear, but of awareness. I still believe in kindness and connection, but now I pair that with boundaries and preparation. That day in the car shook me, but it did not break me. I came out smarter, more grounded, and more capable than before. Story 10. I accepted the nanny job because I needed steady work, and the family seemed nice during the interview. The house was large but cozy, with a backyard full of toys and space for the children to play. The parents explained their expectations clearly and seemed very involved in their kids' daily routines. I felt confident I could manage the job well and looked forward to spending time with the children. From the first day, I noticed cameras installed in unusual places. They were not hidden in obvious spots like living rooms or play areas, but placed subtly in corners or on shelves. When I asked about them, the parents said they were for security and safety, especially since the children had had some incidents in the past. I accepted their explanation and tried not to think much about it as I focused on my work. As days passed, I realized the cameras were always on, and the parents watched the footage regularly. They sometimes called me to ask about minor details they had seen on the videos. It felt strange to know that every moment was being observed and recorded. I started feeling more like an employee under surveillance than a trusted caregiver. One afternoon, while tidying up the living room, I accidentally discovered a locked drawer in the study. Curiosity got the better of me, and I found a small folder inside. It contained printed screenshots from the camera footage, all focused on me. Some showed my interactions with the children, others captured moments when I was alone. The images were detailed and covered almost every hour of my day. I was shocked and confused. I wondered why the parents felt the need to monitor me so closely beyond the usual security measures. I thought about confronting them but hesitated because I depended on the job for income. The feeling of being watched constantly started to weigh on me heavily, affecting how I acted around the children. One evening, after the children were asleep, I searched for more information about hidden cameras and privacy laws in my area. I learned that employers have limited rights to record employees without consent, especially in private spaces like bedrooms or bathrooms. The idea that my privacy might be violated in the home where I worked made me uneasy and anxious. I knew I had to decide what to do next. The next day, I gathered the courage to speak with the parents about the cameras. I explained that while I understood their concerns for safety, I felt uncomfortable with the extent of surveillance. I asked if they could limit the cameras to common areas and stop recording when I was not interacting with the children. Their reaction surprised me. They seemed defensive and insisted the cameras were necessary for their peace of mind. I realized the situation was unlikely to change, and I had to protect myself. I began documenting everything, noting times when I felt stressed or uneasy because of the cameras. I also made sure to keep my phone with me to record any inappropriate behavior or conversations about the surveillance. But it was a difficult balance to maintain, but I wanted to keep evidence in case I needed it. Despite the cameras, I continued doing my best to care for the children. I focused on building a positive relationship with them, making sure they felt safe and happy. I reminded myself that the children were innocent in the situation and deserved my full attention. Their smiles and laughter became the bright spots in my day. After several weeks, I found a new nanny position that offered better terms and a more respectful environment. I gave notice to the family and prepared to leave. On my last day, the parents thanked me but did not mention the cameras or my concerns. I left feeling relieved to move on and hopeful for a fresh start. In the weeks following my departure, I reflected on the experience. I realized how important trust and respect are in any working relationship, especially when caring for children. Being watched constantly without consent was a violation of my boundaries, but it also taught me to advocate for myself. I promised to never accept such conditions again. The experience strengthened my resolve to find work where I could feel valued and safe. I knew that my skills as a caregiver deserved appreciation, not suspicion. I felt grateful to have learned this lesson early in my career. Most importantly, I held on to the positive memories I made with the children, knowing that those moments were real and genuine despite the difficult circumstances. In the end, I moved on to a better job and kept the lessons from the past close to my heart. I learned to trust my instincts and stand up for my rights. The experience did not break me. It made me stronger and more confident. I looked forward to the future with hope and determination, ready for whatever came next. Story 11. I decided to clear out my closet one Saturday afternoon, feeling the weight of accumulated clothes that no longer fit my life. The pile was not huge, just a few shirts, a couple of jackets, and some old jeans that I no longer wore. I carefully folded each piece, wanting to make sure everything looked neat before taking it to the donation center nearby. Giving away clothes felt like shedding an old skin, a way to let go of things that no longer served me. I told myself someone else might find comfort or use in these pieces I had outgrown. Weeks passed after the donation, and life moved forward in its usual rhythm. I worked, managed home responsibilities, and took care of small moments that made up my days. The weather was warming up, and I found myself spending more time outside, walking up and down the block to clear my head. It was a quiet evening when I noticed someone standing across the street, waiting by a bus stop near my building. What caught my eye was not the person, but the shirt they were wearing. It was unmistakably mine. The shirt had a unique pattern, a mix of colors and fabric texture that I remembered well. It was one of those soft cotton shirts that had been a favorite for years but was finally donated because it had worn thin in some places. Seeing it on someone else made me pause. I wondered where they had gotten it. if it was comfortable for them, or if it held a story of its own now. The thought that my belongings had found a new life stirred a curious feeling inside me. I debated whether to approach the person or simply let it be. There was no urgency or danger, only a gentle surprise that my donation had traveled from my closet to the streets where others walked. I decided to keep my distance and just watch for a moment. The stranger did not seem aware of my gaze. They looked tired but content, their posture relaxed as they waited for the bus. It struck me how clothes could silently connect strangers in small, unnoticed ways. Over the next few days, I thought more about that moment. I reflected on the journey of things we no longer need, but that might carry meaning for someone else. It made me appreciate the quiet impact of giving, the ripple effect beyond the initial act. Clothes that once wrapped my body now hugged another, carrying warmth, protection, and maybe even memories. The experience brought a sense of shared humanity, a reminder that we are all linked in ways we do not always see. One afternoon, I passed by the same bus stop and hoped to catch another glimpse of the shirt or the person wearing it. I did not expect to find them again, but the possibility felt comforting. This simple thread of connection had added a new layer of meaning to my routine walks. It made me more aware of the people around me, the stories hidden in everyday moments, and the small kindnesses that quietly shape our world. I never did speak to the person, and I did not need to. The sight of the shirt was enough to remind me of the value in letting go and sharing. It was a gift I had given and a gift I had received in return, a sense of connection and hope that our small actions matter. That realization stayed with me, a gentle anchor in a busy life. From that point on, I looked at donations differently. They were not just discarded items, but bridges between lives, ways to pass on comfort and care. Each shirt, each jacket, each pair of shoes held a story that continued beyond me. And that made giving feel more powerful and alive. The shirt became a symbol of change and kindness, a reminder that even the smallest gestures can resonate in unexpected ways. I continued donating, always imagining the people who might wear those clothes, their faces and lives touching mine across the distance. In a quiet way, that shared humanity was a source of strength and peace for me. Ultimately, the experience taught me about the invisible threads that bind us all. It showed me how generosity could reach beyond the obvious, connecting hearts through something as simple as a shirt. I felt grateful for that, and I carried it with me like a quiet treasure, ready to be shared again. Story 12. I first noticed this sticky note on my laptop early one Monday morning. It was stuck on the corner of the screen, bright yellow with jagged edges, and it read, "Don't forget the meeting at 10. I stared at it, confused, because I did not remember writing it or putting it there. My routine was usually to keep my laptop clear of anything distracting. I peeled the note off and tossed it in the trash, thinking maybe I had stuck it there absent-mindedly. That day I went about my usual tasks, but the note kept nagging at the back of my mind. I even checked my calendar to see if I had scheduled any meeting for 10 a.m., but the day was free. When I opened my laptop for work later, I found another sticky note, this time stuck near the keyboard. It said, "Remember the door code." I was sure I never wrote anything like that, and I did not understand what door code it was referring to. I showed the notes to a friend during lunch, hoping for some advice. She suggested it could be a prank. Maybe someone was sneaking into my place when I was not looking. That idea made my stomach twist. I lived alone, and I had been careful with my keys and security. Still, the thought of someone entering my home without permission unsettled me. The next morning, I found more sticky notes on the laptop. Each note contained short messages like "call the doctor," "check mailbox," and "do not open the back door." The handwriting was neat but unfamiliar. I examined each note carefully, looking for clues. They were all stuck on different parts of the laptop, making it impossible to miss. I started to feel paranoid. I changed my laptop password and even reset it completely. I hoped the notes were not a sign that someone was watching me or knew details about my life. To be sure, I moved the laptop to different rooms, but the next morning, the notes were back. It was as if someone was silently communicating with me through those pieces of paper. One night, I left my laptop open and sat nearby, waiting and watching. After midnight, I heard a faint creak outside my bedroom door. I held my breath, gripping a lamp for protection. The door slowly opened, and a shadow slipped inside. My heart raced, but before I could react, the figure moved quickly to the desk, placed a sticky note on the laptop, and left as quietly as it came. I scrambled to the laptop and grabbed the note. It said, "You are not alone." The words sent chills down my spine. I called the police, but by the time they arrived, the intruder was gone. They checked for fingerprints but found nothing useful. I was told to secure my home and be vigilant. In the following days, I installed cameras and motion sensors. I also asked neighbors to keep an eye out for anything unusual. The sticky notes continued appearing each morning, but now I had proof that someone was inside my home when I was asleep or away. The messages started to feel less like pranks and more like warnings. One note said, "Look under the floorboard." I hesitated, not knowing what I might find. Gathering my courage, I lifted the loose board near the corner of the living room. Hidden beneath was a small box containing an old photo of me as a child and a worn journal. The journal was filled with entries written in the same handwriting as the notes. The journal revealed that the person leaving the notes was someone from my past, someone who had watched over me from a distance. The entries described moments I barely remembered, times when I felt comforted without knowing why. It was like an unseen guardian who had followed my life quietly, leaving reminders and warnings when danger approached. Reading the journal gave me a strange mix of fear and gratitude. I was glad to know I was not completely alone, but the intrusion into my life was unsettling. I reached out to a counselor to help process these feelings. Slowly, I started to feel less like a victim and more like someone with a complex story. I decided to write a note of my own and left it on the laptop. It said, "Thank you. Please stay safe." The next morning, there was no response, no new notes. Days passed, and the sticky notes stopped appearing altogether. The presence that once haunted me seemed to have retreated. In the end, the experience taught me to trust my instincts and to be brave in facing the unknown. I learned that sometimes protection comes in strange forms, even if it means crossing boundaries. Now, when I look at my laptop, I see not just a machine, but a silent witness to a hidden connection that once touched my life. Story 13. I was out running errands one afternoon and decided to stop at a coffee shop to recharge my phone while I grabbed a quick drink. The place was fairly busy, but I found a quiet corner with an outlet near the window. I plugged in my charger, set my phone down on the table, and went up to order. The plan was to relax for a few minutes and then head out again. When I returned to the table, the first thing I noticed was that my phone was not where I had left it. Panic started to rise, but then I saw it on the seat next to my bag. I grabbed it immediately, relieved it had not been stolen. Then I unlocked it and was taken aback. There was a new folder on the home screen named Look. I had no idea how it got there. Curiosity mixed with unease as I opened the folder. Inside were dozens of photos and videos I did not recognize. Some were blurry shots of the coffee shop, others were close-ups of my phone's screen from different angles. A few showed me sitting at the table, though I did not remember anyone taking pictures. The feeling of being watched crept in. I scrolled through the folder, trying to make sense of the images. One video caught my attention because it was longer and clearer. It showed the back of my head as I sat at the table, scrolling through my messages. The angle suggested someone had been very close. I shivered and looked around the coffee shop, wondering who might have done this. No one seemed suspicious, but I felt unsettled. I debated whether to tell the staff, but I was not sure what good it would do. My phone was back in my possession, but my privacy had been violated. I considered calling the police, but I wanted to see if there was more in the folder first. There were also some pictures that seemed like they were taken after I left the table. Shots of the charging cable plugged in without the phone attached. It looked like someone had moved it, maybe even taken my phone briefly before returning it. The thought of someone messing with my device made my stomach turn. I checked the file dates and times to see if the photos were recent, and they were. All taken within the last 20 minutes while I was inside. That meant whoever took them was there the whole time. I realized I had been too trusting to leave my phone out in the open. I wondered if the person wanted me to find the folder. The name Look was so direct it felt like a message. Like they wanted me to see what they had done or discovered. It was unsettling, but also made me feel exposed, like a stranger knew too much about me. I decided to back up the folder onto my laptop and then delete it from the phone. Before doing that, I reviewed everything one last time. There was no personal information in the images, besides me and my phone, but I did find one video that showed the person who took the pictures. It was a brief glimpse of a figure wearing a hoodie standing near the table. The video was too quick to identify a face, but I recognized the clothing. It was someone who worked at the coffee shop, probably a barista. I recalled seeing a young person in a dark hoodie moving between tables. My heart pounded as I thought about what they might have been doing. I called the coffee shop later that day and spoke with the manager. I explained what happened and mentioned the folder. They were shocked and promised to look into it. The manager said they would review security footage to see if any employee had taken my phone or accessed it without permission. A day passed and the manager called me back. They confirmed the footage showed one employee picking up my phone while I was at the counter. The employee admitted to taking pictures out of curiosity but said they did not intend harm. The manager apologized on their behalf and offered me a refund and free drinks for a week. Though the explanation helped, I still felt uneasy. The fact that someone I had trusted with my surroundings could invade my privacy like that was hard to accept. I decided to change my phone's lock code and enable extra security measures. I also deleted the folder from my backup files. In the days that followed, I became more cautious about where I left my phone and what I shared publicly. I realized how vulnerable we are when we put too much faith in strangers. The experience taught me to protect my personal space, even in places that feel safe. I talked with friends and family about what happened, and many shared their own stories of similar experiences. It was a reminder that these things happen more often than we think. But it also showed me that speaking up and taking action can help regain control. Eventually, the fear faded, and I went back to my usual routine. I still visited coffee shops and public places but never left my phone unattended. It was a small change, but one that made me feel safer. Trust is important, but boundaries are necessary. Looking back, I was grateful I found the folder before anything worse happened. It gave me a chance to act before losing more of my privacy. The incident stayed with me as a cautionary tale and a lesson in awareness. Life often throws unexpected challenges our way, and how we respond shapes our experience. For me, this was a moment of vulnerability turned into empowerment. I learned to be vigilant but not afraid. The new folder named Look was more than just files on a phone. It was a signal to pay attention and take back my sense of security. And that is exactly what I did. Story 14. I decided to check out a local open mic night at a small cafe just a few blocks from my apartment. It was the kind of place that attracted all sorts of artists and performers, from musicians to poets to storytellers. I did not know what to expect, but I liked the idea of sitting in the back, enjoying some coffee, and listening to people share pieces of themselves. It was a chilly Friday night, and the place was cozy, filled with low chatter and the smell of roasted beans. The event started late, with a few musicians warming up, their voices and instruments filling the room. I found a seat near the back and settled in with my drink, watching the stage. The performers were interesting, each with their own style, but nothing quite grabbed my attention until a man took the mic. He looked like someone who belonged on stage with confidence and a calm way of speaking. He said he was going to share a story, something personal and true. As he began, I noticed something strange. The story was oddly familiar. He spoke about moving into a new apartment, nervous about the strange noises and odd neighbors. He talked about late nights staring out the window, hearing footsteps in the hall, and feeling watched. The way he described the building, the layout, even the creaky pipes, matched my own place perfectly. I shifted in my seat, heart pounding slightly. Then came the part that made me freeze. He mentioned the apartment number. He said it aloud, and it was the same number as mine. I scanned the room, trying to catch his eyes, but he seemed to look everywhere but at me. I felt exposed, like a secret laid bare without my permission. The audience was quiet, hanging on his words, but I felt a growing unease. The story went on, describing details only someone living there would know. The cracked tile in the kitchen, the way the light flickered in the hallway at certain times, the mysterious sounds from the apartment above. It was as if he had lived my life or had been watching me closely. My mind raced. How did he know all this? Was it coincidence or something else? I wanted to stand up, to ask him how he knew so much, but the words stuck in my throat. I was afraid of what I might hear, afraid to confront the unknown. The man finished his story with a quiet line about feeling like he was not alone, that someone or something was always just out of sight, waiting. The room clapped politely, but I barely heard it. After the applause, the man stepped down, and the next performer took the stage. I stayed seated, my thoughts tangled. I considered leaving, but I wanted answers. I waited until the event ended and the crowd thinned. I watched the man pack up his things and head toward the exit. I caught up to him outside under the dim street light. I asked him how he knew about my apartment and the details he shared. He looked surprised but then smiled faintly. He said he wrote the story based on things he had heard from others, a kind of urban legend about the building. He had never been inside but found inspiration in the whispers and rumors that surrounded the place. I felt a mix of relief and confusion. It was not personal, but how did these rumors get so accurate? We talked for a few minutes longer. He said he liked to collect stories, piece together fragments from different people and make them his own. It was a way to connect, to find meaning in shared experiences. I realized that while the story was close to my life, it was also a creation, a blend of many voices. Still, the coincidence was unsettling. When I got home that night, I double-checked the locks on the door and windows. The apartment felt different, more alive with stories I had not known. I looked around at the familiar cracks and shadows, now part of a narrative someone else had told too. Instead of fear, I felt a strange comfort. Maybe sharing our stories, even when unexpected, helps us feel less alone. The next time I walked past the cafe, I saw a small flyer for another open mic night. I thought about going back, maybe to tell my own story this time, to take control of the narrative that someone else had almost claimed. In the end, the experience reminded me that our lives are stories waiting to be shared, heard, and sometimes rewritten. Story 15. I was out one Friday night, looking to unwind after a long week. The bar was dimly lit, filled with low conversations and soft music. I found a quiet spot near the back and ordered a drink, hoping for a peaceful evening. That was when someone sat down beside me and started a conversation. They asked me if I was new around here, and I said no, I had been in the city for a while. We started talking about our lives, our jobs, and the little things that brought us joy or frustration. I liked their easy manner and open smile, so I let myself relax. The night stretched on with laughter and stories exchanged. As the evening went on, I noticed they kept glancing at my arm, which I had been keeping mostly covered. Eventually, they pointed at it and said something that stopped me cold. They said they recognized the scar on my inner forearm, the one I never show anyone. It was like a secret I carried close, and I had never expected a stranger to notice it. I tried to brush it off, saying it was nothing important. But they insisted, saying scars like that had stories worth telling. I hesitated, feeling vulnerable in a way I was not used to. Slowly, I began to share how I got the scar, the story I rarely told. It happened years ago during a difficult time in my life. I was young and reckless, trying to find my place and make sense of everything. The scar came from an accident, one I had buried under layers of denial and silence. Talking about it now felt like peeling back a part of myself I kept hidden. They listened without interrupting, their eyes full of understanding rather than judgment. That simple act of being heard made me feel lighter than I had in a long time. We talked more about how scars, both visible and invisible, shape who we are. I realized I was not alone in carrying such burdens. The night ended, and we said our goodbyes with a promise to meet again. On my way home, I felt a strange mix of relief and hope. Meeting someone who saw past the surface reminded me of the power of connection. Sometimes the scars we hide are the ones that need to be seen the most. In the following days, I reflected on how much that encounter had shifted my perspective. I started to think about the parts of myself I had kept locked away. I realized that showing vulnerability does not make us weak, but rather brave. It opens doors to healing and understanding. I decided to stop hiding my scar, both literally and figuratively. I wore short sleeves more often, no longer ashamed or afraid of what others might think. When people asked, I shared my story honestly. To my surprise, many responded with kindness in their own stories. This experience taught me that everyone has marks from their past, and each one carries meaning. It is okay to be imperfect and to share that imperfection with others. The scar that once felt like a secret shame became a symbol of resilience. It reminded me of how far I had come and who I had become. I never saw that person again, but their impact stayed with me. They showed me the importance of empathy and the courage to be seen. Life is full of unexpected meetings that can change us if we are open to them. Sometimes a scar is not just a mark of pain, but a sign of survival and growth. Now, when I look at my scar, I do not feel fear or shame. I see strength in a story worth telling. It is part of me, and I accept it fully. That night at the bar was a turning point, a moment when a stranger helped me see myself in a new light. I am grateful for that chance encounter, for the conversation that opened my heart. It reminded me that healing often begins when we let others in. I carry that lesson with me, ready to face whatever comes next with openness and courage. The scar is no longer hidden, and neither is the person I am becoming. Story 16. I called customer support late one evening after a frustrating day trying to fix an issue with my internet connection. The moment the call connected, a voice came through the speaker and said, "It's you again, huh?" The tone was oddly familiar, almost teasing, but there was no mistaking the surprise in it. I froze for a second, wondering if I had been transferred to the wrong department or if someone on the other end had recognized my number. I was not sure if I should be amused or annoyed. The representative chuckled lightly and said, "Yeah, it's me. I remembered your call from last week. You've had some bad luck with your service, huh?" The familiarity was unexpected, but I admitted it made me feel a little less like just another frustrated customer. We started talking, and she asked what was wrong this time. I explained that my internet kept cutting out during important work calls, and no matter what I did, it would disconnect randomly. She listened carefully, then walked me through a series of troubleshooting steps. Each time I thought we were making progress, the connection would drop again or an error would pop up. I could hear her typing notes and murmuring updates into her system. The conversation was less robotic and more personal than I had anticipated. She even joked about how she should get a loyalty card for helping me so often. After almost an hour on the phone, we still had not solved the problem. She sighed and said, "I know how frustrating this is. I'll escalate your case to the senior tech team. They might find something we're missing." She promised to call me back the next day with updates and thanked me for sticking with it. I felt a strange mix of relief and lingering irritation. At least I was not being treated like just a number this time. The next day, I waited anxiously for the call. When it came, the same voice answered with a cheerful greeting. "It's you again, huh?" I smiled despite myself and replied, "Yeah, it's me. What do you have for me today?" She laughed and said they found a wiring issue near my building, causing the disruptions. A crew would come the following morning to fix it. I felt a wave of gratitude. This was the first time I was getting real answers after weeks of silence and automated responses. When the technician arrived, he confirmed the problem and worked quickly to replace the faulty cables. I watched as the lines were restored, and by the afternoon my internet was back to normal. The difference was immediate. No more dropped calls or frozen screens. I called customer support once more to thank the woman who had helped me. She answered with a surprised tone, "Well, look who's back," but this time with good news. Our conversations continued over the following months. Whenever I had an issue or question, I called the same support line, and she would answer with that familiar "It's you again, huh?" The phrase became something of a comforting greeting, a reminder that behind the service and technology, there was a human who cared. The company's support was still far from perfect, but this one connection made it feel less impersonal. One afternoon, after another quick chat to resolve a billing confusion, she mentioned how unusual it was to have a customer keep calling but never get angry or rude. I admitted that her kindness and patience made a big difference. We joked about how rare it was for anyone to stick around through so many calls without frustration boiling over. It felt like a strange friendship had developed through wires and headsets. Then, a few months later, my internet went down again during a crucial deadline. I called customer support, bracing myself for the usual hassle. When she answered, she said, "You again." I laughed and said, "Yeah, me again. Let's fix this so I can stop bothering you." She smiled through the line and said, "We've got this." The problem was quickly identified as a software glitch, and she walked me through the fix without fuss. That night, I thought about how strange it was to have formed this unexpected bond. A simple greeting, "It's you again, huh?" had transformed from a teasing annoyance into a warm connection. The woman on the other end of the line had turned a frustrating experience into something more human. I realized that sometimes in the most mundane places, a little kindness could change everything. As I closed my laptop and settled in for the evening, I felt grateful. The internet was working, my work was saved, and I had found a rare person who made even customer support feel personal. I knew I would call again if needed, and I looked forward to hearing that familiar phrase, "It's you again, huh?" It was no longer a burden, but a small moment of connection in a busy, often disconnected world. Story 17. I walked into the clinic feeling a mix of nerves and hope. It was my first appointment with this particular doctor, someone I had heard good things about from a friend. When I arrived, I checked in at the reception desk, offering my name and appointment time. The receptionist smiled and nodded, then reached for a file that was already sitting on the counter. I thought that was a little unusual, but didn't question it at first. As she handed me the file, I noticed something strange. It was already labeled with my name, birth date, and a list of medical details that I had never shared. I had not filled out any forms yet, and this was my first visit. The file included information about allergies, previous surgeries, and even some notes about my family's health history. It felt like the clinic already knew me better than I expected. I looked up at the receptionist and asked quietly how they had gotten all this information. She smiled politely but said it was standard procedure, that they gathered this data from previous records or referrals. I felt a strange chill run down my spine. I had not been referred by anyone, and I had never been to this clinic before. It was as if someone else had created a medical file in my name before I even walked through the door. Trying to shake off the discomfort, I took the file and waited in the lobby. The pages felt heavier than normal, as if carrying secrets that were not mine to carry. I wondered if this was some kind of mistake or a clerical error. What worried me most was the thought that my personal health information might have been accessed without my knowledge. When the nurse called me into the exam room, I carried the file with me, still flipping through it quietly. The doctor entered with a calm, professional demeanor and glanced briefly at the file. He asked if I wanted to confirm the details, and I said yes, though I was hesitant. As I read the notes aloud, some of the information was completely wrong or outdated, while other parts were oddly specific and detailed. The doctor explained that sometimes medical records are transferred from other clinics or hospitals, and that might be why my file was so complete. I told him I had not visited any other facility recently and that I had never given consent to